Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today. I'm very delighted to bring to you a project that I've been working on over the last 9 months. So it's quite a recent project, and it's still in its development stages, really. So I'm a regional care development advisor for the Motor Neurone Disease Association, and I cover a patch at the bottom of England here. You can see the Isle of Wight there at the bottom there. So I'm a regional care development advisor, and I have a multifunctional role, but part of what I do is work very closely with volunteers. So my patch takes up mainly this area, which Hampshire and Dorset. You can see the Isle of Wight there, just to make sure you can see where we are. In this area, there's probably about 200 to 230 people living with MND at any one time, and I'm quite often in touch with them personally, but also I have about 24 volunteer association visitors who support people very closely on a one-to-one basis through direct visits to them at home or meeting them in support group meetings. So my association visitors I link in very closely with, and they're very important to support people in this area. Last year, this conference heard from an English speech and language therapist, Jennifer Benson, and I watched her from home, her recording at the conference, and she was very much talking about how she was encouraging people to voice bank and some of the people that she was looking after, and she was talking about how important it was, and what we've been hearing about this morning, how important it is to have your own voice, if possible, on your communication aid, because of the importance of your own identity, and a lot of that comes through with your voice. And she was very much talking about this, and part of her presentation, there was a film from a young gentleman who had banked his own voice and done it at a time when he was able to record his voice quite well. And he was saying how important it had been for him and his family, particularly his young children, to still hear his own voice when he was using a communication aid. So it really made me think about what happened in my area, what happens in my patch, and was it important? Had people been accessing voice banking? Actually, we have a very stretched speech and language therapy in my area, and this fairly new technology was something that speech and language therapists hadn't been able to support very easily, and they're a very stretched service. We have waiting lists, we have difficulties with accessing communication aids, so they're struggling with those in that sort of environment. Only a few people really in my area had been doing voice banking. We're talking about the last year, so it's fairly recently. Not that many people had been doing voice banking, and when they had been thinking about doing it, actually it was a bit too late. Their voices had changed too much, so they couldn't actually go through the process of doing voice banking, even with support. Now, the association in the last year have also appointed a communications aids manager, a young, lovely chap called Matthew Hollis, and he's been working on a national basis with the association, and one of his jobs has been to provide more information for people with MND, and also for professionals, so they understand, so there's a lot more information out there and available for people. And it's not just about voice banking, he has quite a big remit as well. But he was also able to work on actually funding some equipment so that some speech and language therapists could actually have some equipment for assessment purposes and to loan out to people to perhaps start voice banking with people. I also realized that in the last year, there's been a lot of raised awareness amongst the MND community themselves. And there's been forums, at meetings, some of the support group meetings I go to, there's a real buzz about who's done voice banking yet. And so actually within the MND community themselves. And there's various blogs on the internet that people can have a look at. And there's one blog called 1 in 400, which is actually a gentleman who lives quite close to where my patch is, who actually has a friendly user's guide on how to voice bank that people actually have been accessing. So it made me think what's going to happen in our area. It was felt that actually speech and language therapists are best placed to support people with voice banking, but as I know, that it needs to be done early when people have a good quality voice. And I'm aware that quite often a speech and language therapist only gets the referral for somebody with motor neurone disease after they've had a change in their voice quality anyway. So at that point, they might have missed the boat. So it needs to be done early. And I thought, well, maybe we could use a volunteer to help with this, to actually introduce voice banking and support people to do voice banking earlier. I was aware that the people who had been voice banking in my patch tended to be the young, techie guys. And I don't want to generalize by that, but that's the impression I got. So what about everybody else? What about the people who weren't very techie? Why shouldn't they have access to this sort of voice banking? The association has a long history of working with volunteers, and they're one of our most important assets. They support people in lots of different ways over the areas in the country. And, I did think this is perhaps a possibility, is something we could do, is use a volunteer. And I discussed this with my manager, who thought it was worth thinking about, which of course I had been already. It coincided with a phone call from a lady called Kim, who phoned me up wanting to know if there was anything she could do to perhaps become an association visitor or another sort of volunteer. She would really like to help people with MND. And in the course of the discussion, we were talking about perhaps her becoming an association visitor. She just asked me this question: have you got any projects that I can help you with? So then we had a discussion about what my ideas were, perhaps about using a volunteer to do voice banking, and explained what it was. After the phone call, she went away and investigated herself. She found out all about voice banking. She donated her voice. She banked her own voice and came back to me and said, I would really like to help support people to do what I have just done, because it was such a positive thing to do just for myself. So we decided that we would perhaps have a pilot project in Portsmouth, which is one of my patches, and see if we could introduce her to help support people in the area to do voice banking. It was felt that our established visitor training, association visitor training, would be a really good training for her to do, because some of the things as a volunteer, it's very important that we know that they are a good model for us. So the course contents would be, this has been running for quite a few years: what is MND, issues around data protection, confidentiality, the importance of listening skills, how to signpost to other people for further support, and actually, quite importantly, is looking after yourself, as we all know we have to do. So the Portsmouth Voice Banking project started only this summer, and there was myself, an RCDA, the volunteer, the local MND Care Centre coordinator was involved, a senior speech and language therapist, the communication aids coordinator I spoke about before, but also a volunteer development coordinator who would actually be risk assessing the role and perhaps developing any training programs that might be ongoing. The association has initially funded, and I'm very grateful for this, 1 laptop and 6 microphone recording headsets. And this is for quite a small area around Portsmouth that I'm thinking of, that we're doing the project. And these can be loaned out to people on a short-term basis so that they can actually do the recordings in a timely manner earlier on in the course of their disease. There's other costs that we have to consider, and that includes her travelling expenses and various training costs. So we'll be assessing that. We designed an information leaflet that the professionals and people in the MND care teams could perhaps give to people with motor neuron disease earlier on in the course of their disease. So this would be people who perhaps hadn't had their voice affected yet. I'm very aware that after a diagnosis of MND, there's so much that's going through people's lives and so much going on. To actually consider the fact that they might lose their voice as well is sometimes quite difficult to manage. So that's the point, though, that people have to start thinking about this as an opportunity So we designed a leaflet that could be given to explain what would be happening. Referrals to the volunteer can come from various places. So the MND Association has a helpline, so perhaps the MND helpline could send through some referrals to the volunteer. Speech and language therapists, perhaps if they don't have the ability to support people, then it can come from them. Other healthcare professionals, the MND Care Centre coordinator, I think, will probably be the main person who will refer in, because she will know the people from the clinics and will know whether there's somebody who would like to talk about this with somebody. And also from the person with MND themselves. And actually this has been the main route. It's word of mouth amongst the MND community that people have been wanting to voice bank, and they might not have a speech and language therapist because they haven't got a problem with their voice, but they can get help and support to actually do voice banking. The volunteer can also refer straight back to professionals if she feels that that person actually needs professional speech and language therapy input rather than her helping to support somebody. The support that she can offer, it could be just advice, it might be just a telephone call and signposting people to actually do it themselves. But it could be actually providing the equipment as well, so we can loan out the equipment to them, because they might only need it for a short amount of time. And it might be that they need close individual support as required. But what I do emphasize, and other family members can be supported to help. In fact, we've had the volunteer has actually supported one young girl to voice bank for her sister who has MND, because her sister's voice is not strong enough. Must emphasize that the volunteer is not providing professional speech and language therapy advice. And right from the start, I've been saying that over and over again, because the volunteer is not a speech and language therapist. It just is, we're all doing is supporting someone to do the voice banking itself. So voice banking is not complex, but it does require a bit of commitment. And actually, the volunteer can talk this through with somebody in the early stages. It does take a bit of time to actually record the phrases needed. And also, for them to understand it might never get used. They might not have a problem with their voice. Or it might be unsuitable for the actual device that a speech and language therapist recommends in the future, so it might never be needed. And to warn people, it's not an exact copy of your own voice, it's a similar copy. So I don't like people to go in with this with high expectations of it sounding exactly like themselves. So in the last 5 months in Portsmouth, 2 people independently have completed voice banking. And one of these was with speech and language therapy advice and support, and one was with somebody who'd been to the 1 in 400 blog and downloaded the guide from there and done it themselves like that. But actually 6 people since August actually have completed voice banking with the support of the equipment and the volunteer in the area. And of two of these people had needed close one-to-one support, and they were definitely in the non-techie category. And so I was very pleased. They've completed voice banking, and it took quite a few visits from the volunteer to her house to encourage them to actually go through the process. So we're going to be evaluating what happens, and we're getting people to feedback after they've done voice banking, how they felt about the process and whether it was helpful having the support of the volunteer. And one of the things I want to know, are more people accessing voice banking in a timely way? Are they getting it done? And for me, very importantly, is there a more diverse range of participants? So are we getting more women? Are we getting an older population actually managing to achieve voice banking? And to assess how much support is actually needed. And I've been thinking about other ways that we do support. So maybe within a group situation, can we just introduce voice banking and possibly talk about message banking more so now? So find out actually what support is actually needed. What now? What I would like to see is that more speech and language therapy departments take on the responsibility of giving early support to people with voice banking and message banking and ongoing. But they need to be able to accept referrals earlier on before people have a problem with their speech. And this is what the difficulty has been at the moment. Will the association develop this volunteer role further, perhaps in areas where there is a difficulty with speech and language therapy access? We need to keep our eye on all the costs, and whichever services that people are using, there's going to be a cost effect that we need to think about. And what other opportunities are there? Message banking, digital legacies, voice repairs. There's quite a lot, and keeping up to date with everything. We have a responsibility to try and make sure these people have access to these services for a good quality of life. So from this talk today, these are the learning points I would like you to take away. That teams supporting people with MND should discuss opportunities, such as voice banking, message banking, earlier on, if possible, in a sensitive way. It's not for everybody. Some people need extra support to engage in technology. Not everyone is techie. I'm not. And maybe trained volunteers could be used and could be helpful here. I'd like to say a special thank you to Kim, because actually without her commitment and dedication, this project just wouldn't have happened. So I suppose it was opportunistic that she came along at the same time that I was thinking about this. So I would like to say thank you to Kim. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation. There's a few, if you have any questions.
Thank you. Yes, there's plenty of time for questions now.
Good morning. Eduardo Locatelli from Florida. Mobile devices, the mobile phones, can be recording devices. Have we thought about using them for recording?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what
telephones, iPhones, can we use them for recording?
Yes, I'm not a speech and language therapist, and I don't get involved in that, but there are lots of recordings, and I think probably John could help with that.
There are a number of different apps that can be used for voice recording. A little bit more difficult for voice banking, because voice banking requires one sits in front of a computer with a very high quality microphone, and then you are having to follow a very specific script that is given to you in order to record. Mm-hmm. If someone is doing something like message banking, certainly using any kind of recorder, the challenge always is the quality of the microphone. And so many people can record with different apps on their iPhone or other mobile devices, but depending upon the quality of the microphone, it might not be as acceptable as a higher quality.
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions?
Hiya. I'm really keen about this as a speech and language therapist, and we're in the other side of your patch in Surrey.
Oh, right.
So I'm going to go and talk to Jane about it when I get back, I think. But I think our issue as speech therapists is that we just don't get people early enough. Yeah. And I think in our team, we'd happily accept referrals for this, because I think we recognise the importance. And I guess it's actually educating or informing the clinicians that we can have the referral before the change happens. Yeah. Which just doesn't happen. Yeah. So it's not other speech therapists may not be able to, and we're in a better position at the moment than we have been in ages, because it is really time consuming for us. And I think if we can have the support of the MNDA volunteers as well, that would really help us, because we can obviously get the patients to you quicker. Yeah. So I think it's bigger for clinicians and maybe the MNDA to push that forward, so we get them earlier.
I'm trying. And definitely in my area, there's one speech and language therapy team that are actually talking about training the speech and language therapy assistants to do voice banking, but then it has to be the MND care team, and it could be a nurse, it could be a physio in that team, actually having early discussions with people, say, hey, have you heard about this? What do you think? Perhaps you could message bank or voice bank at an earlier stage, but I think it's the responsibility of the whole MND team to be aware of the opportunities and make sure that people aren't missing out, and provide support if necessary for those people who want to do it. It's not for everybody. Yeah, so very nice to hear from you.
Hello, I'm a community occupational therapist in Northern Ireland, and I was listening to what the speech and language therapist has just said. And we find that as occupational therapists, we're usually one of the first over the doorstep after diagnosis outside of the neurology team. And so today has opened our eyes about this. The thing that would worry me at the moment is if we're aware as OTs of this, we don't want to be raising expectations if it's not available.
Well, yes, I agree. I mean, quite often I would know about it and wouldn't talk about it to with people because I knew there wasn't the support to follow it up, and so that's why I developed this.
Because as soon as you mention it, a lot of people might find it a brilliant, hopeful thing to do, as earlier speakers have said, and you don't want to be dashing that. But the thing today for us is, as OTs, is that we are now aware of it and that we can help to move it on just by having that awareness and hopefully spread the word.
Yeah, well, that'd be great if you did. Anything else?
Yeah, I've got one here. I'm a speech and language therapist, and I've had quite successful outcomes with some people doing voice banking, but they've all been able to do it independently. I'm just wondering, did your volunteer support people where they weren't able to physically access the software? Is that how her role was used?
What the volunteer has done is actually help set people up with all the software and gone to the house and advised them about the room that they're doing the voice banking in and the various tips like doing it at the same time every day and trying to do it in the morning. So she's actually sat down with people and helped them do that because that's often quite an obstacle for people to do it by themselves.
I just was thinking about a couple of patients who haven't been able to actually physically access in terms of using a mouse, hand function, and also visually, because the website isn't adaptable on Model Talker that we've been using, and I've had some people with visual impairment that haven't been able to use it. So if they had a partner that was able to sit and do the session with them, that would be helpful.
Well, she has sat in for quite a few visits with 2 people, and they've needed a lot of close support.
That's great.
That's great. Actually having to almost coach them through doing the session.
Yeah.
But they've managed to achieve to voice bank in the end, which there's no way it would have happened before.
That's great, because that's a big time commitment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just another note as well is that we work quite closely with the MND nurse in our area, so she's always bringing it up early on in the diagnosis, and she's got a leaflet that we've produced to give to people if they want a bit more information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's one at the front here.
Down in the front.
Thank you for your presentation. This is something that's not done widely in my patch, so I have no experience with it. We've heard a lot about the front end of recording voices and phrases. What happens afterwards? How does it get moved from the cloud to a device?
Well, John, would you like to? My assistant, John.
My pleasure. So depending upon which voice banking engine one is using, so if one is using Model Talker, for example, which is one of the free ones, or if one is using Acapella, which isn't free, they produce, both of them, first of all, produce a final voice that one can listen to before you commit. And then from there, if you are committing, if it's a purchase, you then receive the format file for most of the current speech generating devices, a SAPI, it's called SAPI file. And that file then can be downloaded into a number of speech generating devices. It actually becomes almost a feature match issue when one begins to think about the best tools and technology, because as you've mentioned, if someone starts this very early as technology is changing, we also want to make sure that the voice banking company is providing it ultimately in the format that matches the technology of the day. But there is a file format that is downloaded into the speech generating device.
Is that step available anywhere, like on a YouTube video that people could just Is anyone aware of that?
There are some YouTube videos on, actually.
The next.
Oh, the next
P?
step.
No.
Yeah. I think the voice can be downloaded onto a communication aid on a lot of the regular ones that are frequently used by speech and language therapists, and it can just be downloaded onto as an option onto the voice on a communication aid. So quite a lot of the regular ones that probably the speech and language therapists are aware of all the time. There's an established link between Model Talker, for example, and Therapy Box, and there's quite a lot of links there. But I don't get involved in that. It's definitely on to the speech and language therapist professionals for that. There's lots of information out there. You just need to know to look for it.
Hello.
Kevin?
What? Sorry, Jill and I were making dinner plans.
I wanted to make sure that it is primarily the SAPI file that most of the voice banking modules are sending.
Yeah. So you need to, so if you're going to take one of the model talker voices or the custom voices that you get, you just need to make sure in advance that it can go in, and I'm 90% sure that all of the commercially available dedicated devices take that. If you're going to try to use it on a tablet, an Android tablet, I know Model Talker can take your voice, put it into an Android tablet, and then use it across any text-to-speech program. But if you want to do the same thing on an iPad, there's one specific program from actually a UK company that you have to use. Otherwise, it's the only one that can use the Model Talker voice, and that's a paid app. I think it's like 200 euros or something like that. So my recommendation is buy a cheap Android tablet and use Speech Assistant for free.
Okay.
And then finally, if you are getting a system, knowing that if the person with MND may initially be using one system and then perhaps later using a different technology, if you are entering into it knowing that the format is going to be supported by the company and will be supported if you switch to new technology is really key, because sometimes people have gotten something that's only been a short-lived available tool.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.